So there's Pierre Landrin, her employer, who proposed to her on the 1st of September 1927 there. But Edel explained to him, look, I've made a vow to enter the Poor Clares, and I'm going to do so as soon as I know my family are in the clear financially. So she held on until then. But she kept up communication with Pierre. He was heartbroken, and they developed a strong spiritual relationship even in themselves. The correspondence did peter out in the 1930s, but we learn a great deal about Edel's spirituality from the letters that she wrote to him, and kind of apologizing herself, and maybe she felt maybe she hadn't made herself clear when she turned him down, and she tried to explain things in the light of her faith. And Pierre soon realized that this was a chosen soul. She had a deep, deep spirituality, and that she was not his really for the asking. Later on, he himself got married, and he named one of his daughters Edel, after Edel Quinn. So he really appreciated his own faith was strengthened by that. So there she is in the 1930s. Here she is. She eventually, a friend of hers simply asked her to join the Legion, and kind of like Alfie Lambe, she excelled at her Legion membership. She absorbed the spirituality of the Legion in the true devotion to Mary, and became a marvelous legionary with great apostolic spirit, in spite of her illness and her frailty. She took very ill in the early 1930s with tuberculosis. In fact, she went to enter the Poor Clares in the late 1920s, around about this time, and the Poor Clares, she had made arrangements. It was going to be on the Feast of the Annunciation, and on the March 25th, and so on the February, she suddenly was diagnosed with tuberculosis. So again, her vocation to religious life completely frustrated. That God's plan for her was obviously something completely different. It wasn't to be the Poor Clares. And yet, again, heartbroken by that, and devastated that, what am I going to do now? Where is God calling me? So, and she was very sick. In fact, so sick that she had to give up the Legion, and she was admitted to a sanatorium. And back then in the 1930s, the only remedy for tuberculosis was fresh air and more fresh air. They'd put you in the sanatorium, open the windows, winter, summer, and it helped, I think, but this was the supposed cure. So she stayed in the sanatorium about a year, I think, and eventually said, well, look, this is crazy. I'm not getting any better, and my family can't afford this, so I'm leaving. So a visitor came to her in a car, she packed her things and just went. And it wasn't as if she was being hasty or rash. She was really trying to look after her family's needs. That she knew she wasn't getting better, and this wasn't doing any good, so it was time to leave. So gradually she got back involved in the Legion, and even though she's quite sick, she managed to conceal it quite well by her cheerful personality, and gradually got back into the swing of things with the Legion, and seemed to improve a little, at least, anyway, in the early 1930s. So 1934 was the first Legion pilgrimage to Lourdes, and Edel went. She's the centre there at the back of that photograph. She went with them, even though she was desperately sick. And on one occasion she even fainted. They went to visit the local bishop of Tarbes, I think in Lourdes, and Edel fainted on this trip. She hadn't had breakfast before Mass, and they went straight from Mass. And she used to do this kind of thing regularly, really not eating enough, huge self-denial in her whole life, her whole spirituality there. So here she's with some of her friends, Mona McCarthy and Emma Bodkin, and there was a fourth, Muriel Wales. The four of them, Frank Duff nicknamed the gang. They were always palling around together, and they had great fun. You can see by the smiles, there were great funs in the 1930s there. So 1936, she and Muriel Wales, one of the gang, they went on a trip to Wales and to England to spread the Legion. And even though Edel really wasn't that well, Muriel went with her to keep an eye on her, because Muriel says herself, there's a video interview with her, Muriel says that Frank Duff knew that Muriel was well able to eat and rest and do all the normal things, whereas Edel was at this heroic level of giving of herself. So he sent Muriel with Edel to make sure that she would look after herself, but that the two would try to spread the Legion in Wales and in England, specifically North Wales. And they did, and they went for 2 weeks. The first week, things didn't go too well. The second week, they succeeded in getting permission to start 7 Presidia in that short visit. So that's the kind of effect they had. So they did, and on their return, they were thrilled. They went to see Frank Duff and explained everything to him. And Frank Duff suggested to Edel in his own characteristic way, well, now that you've been to Wales, in fact what Edel wanted to do was to go back to England and to work there and to spread the Legion there instead. So Frank said, well, how about Africa? And she said, yeah, I'll do it, no problem, I'll go. And so she did. There was all kinds of consternation at the Legion headquarters, the concilium meeting, that Edel, a frail, sickly young woman, should go to Africa. Dangerous continent, full of the unknown, full of wild jungle animals, and who knows what. Missionaries found it difficult enough, let alone a weak young girl like Edel Quinn. So at the concilium meeting where they were making the decision to send her, there was a priest there, Monsignor McGuinness, who stood up and said, look, I've been in Africa for years. This is crazy, sending her out there. It's extremely dangerous. She's not a well woman. This just is not right. And he was very much against the whole idea of sending Edel. And Edel herself stood up during the meeting and she said, well, you know, I know I'm not going on any kind of picnic. And Monsignor McGuinness was quite a forthright man. He said, picnic? He said, you'll be the picnic, you know? And so the whole place broke into laughter at that time. And Frank Duff stood up then and he said, well, she won't be much of a picnic, really, you know? And so at that stage, the atmosphere kind of relaxed a bit, and the permission was granted and she was set to go. But Edel, being the sensitive spiritual soul that she was, shortly after that went to the Presidium meeting where Monsignor McGuinness was the spiritual director. And during the meeting, one of the members tells this story. Edel kind of burst in the door and stopped the meeting and went up and knelt next to Monsignor McGuinness and apologized. She said, look, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to undermine your authority or to, you know, I really didn't mean to cause to change, to sway the opinion of the concilium like that. And poor Monsignor McGuinness, nearly close to tears himself, he said, look, you know, the Lord works in his own way. And he kind of embraced her, and she embraced everybody at the meeting, and shortly after then she was to set sail for Africa. So here she is in England, near London, on the ship, ready to go with Frank Duff. This is quite an historic photograph with Edel Quinn and Frank Duff. And she was close to tears at this parting, but she told the people with her, the Legionaries who came to see her off, look, try not to say too much in case I break down. I don't want to break down in tears. And she knew herself. She told the Legionaries, I'm not coming back. She had this sense of utter commitment. So there she is on board ship, her usual smile. As it turned out, there wasn't room in the ship. And the way the Lord works things out, there was a cancellation, and so Edel got a first-class cabin. And she was a bit, maybe on her own humility, didn't really like that too much, but Frank Duff was happy that she had got comfortable passage, because it would take weeks to travel to Africa. And more than that, because she had a first-class cabin, she was able to have Mass celebrated in the cabin every day on the way to Africa. So amazing how the Lord looks after his own. So this is en route, just a picture of Edel in her safari dress in Port Said. That's on the way to Mombasa in Kenya. Here she is now in Kenya herself. So she began in Kenya, Nairobi, and made lots of friends there. Here's a priest that supported Edel a great deal in her own work along the way. But again had all kinds of difficulties trying to begin the Legion. Part of that was the language barrier. Part of that was the racial barrier, because you had whites, you had Indians, Asians, and native Africans too. And they wouldn't mix. The three ethnic groups would not mix together. And so Edel came along and said, well, look, the Legion is for everybody. We don't set up separate groups like that. And they said, well, no, this is the way things are.